so we might warn them with something like, some files can harm your computer, be careful what you click on. Well, that's an entirely worthless warning. Which files can harm my computer? How do I make this decision about what to do?
I really think that the industry of security and all these tangential industries that use security have this kind of outdated mindset of the more secure something is, the less usable it is. You can build systems that are more usable and more secure, and actually usability ends up helping security in a lot of ways.
If we don't think about usability, if we don't think about how does the human do the thing we want them to do, we're less secure and the person is frustrated.
Welcome to our podcast. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Adam Shostack. Adam is an authority in the world of threat modeling and has been instrumental in shaping how businesses approach security. He is the author of an industry standard book, Threat Modeling, Designing for Security, and his latest book, Threats, What Every Engineer Should Learn from Star Wars, is an unique endeavor to teach the complexities of security in an engaging and accessible way. I'm very excited to hear more about that. During his time at Microsoft, Adam was an essential part of the security development lifecycle team, and his methodologies have significantly influenced organizations to build better, more secure systems. His belief in democratizing threat modeling that everyone can and should be involved in has been transformative in the field, and we're thrilled to have you with us today, Adam.
So good to be here. Thank you.
So just as an introduction, I would love to just hear a little bit about your journey into the world of security and what drew you into the field of threat modeling.
Sure. So let's see. My first job was at a medical research lab where we were using computers in the operating room to help with surgical planning and surgical activity. And I was the systems administrator, so I had to deal with security and privacy. And I learned that I had a knack for it and I enjoyed it. And so I shifted my focus from system administration to security. This is long enough ago that there weren't certifications or other today's career paths were not yet around.
You paved the way.
I don't know if I paved the way so much as I stumbled through it and smoothed some rocks along the path.
That's a type of paving.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
And so let's see. I got into threat modeling, which was a sort of vague concept. The first paper I wrote on the subject in 1999 was me and another security expert, Bruce Schneier, who's well known. And we started to threat model smart cards. And the way we did it was we sat there and it's 1997, we talked on the phone a lot. And we said, these are the threats. And so we developed this understanding. And then 2006, I joined Microsoft. And my boss said to me, we need to scale this thing. And I said, well, okay, why? And he's like, well, try and do a threat model for all of Windows. And I'm like, oh, okay. Or Office or Xbox. Any one of these products, the amount of work that's involved in doing it, so enormous that no single person could take it on. And so we needed ways of making it work. And since then, I've learned, and this is a usability lesson, I've learned that the review, the framing of security experts are going to review your work has all sorts of problems, like you do the work and then someone comes in and says you did it wrong later on. And it's frustrating by design, right? The human beings who are doing this work think they're done. And then somebody comes in and says, nope, you're not. We've got to do this other thing. And so getting usability, getting security into the development process earlier becomes this one magical trick to make things work better.
Yeah.
And so that was really the origin, was my time at Microsoft. And since then, as a consultant, I work with all sorts of organizations and figuring out how to help them and what they really need. I've been able to draw on both my knowledge as a security expert, but also a lot of usability techniques of observation, of believing that the person wants to accomplish some task and defining what that task is and seeing what's going on. And so I'm really happy to be here. And I think there's lots of overlap between security done well and usability done well. And so let's go.
Yeah. I really think that the industry of security and all these tangential industries that use security have this kind of outdated mindset of the more secure something is, the less usable it is. And so talking to somebody like you, I think helps change that conversation to say, oh no, you can build systems that are more usable and more secure. And actually usability ends up helping security in a lot of ways. And I'm sure you have lots of stories that kind of echo that.
Absolutely. And, I'll give you one which is personally frustrating me right now.
Oh yeah, I'd love it.
So this vendor that I use instituted some new checks to avoid bots. And it says, check this. It's like, you must have an ad blocker or JavaScript turned off. Yes, I have both. And then it says, check the box below to proceed. There's no box.
Classic.
And so what happens is it like pops this up and it pops it up again, and then it disappears, and it's like, you've been blocked. Please contact customer support.
Yeah.
Okay, they're more secure, but they've also lost my business because I have a task that I want to accomplish and I can't accomplish it. And so I'm using alternate providers because this is barely even into the world of usability. This is just straight up testing, right? You've said, here's the scenario. You've got JavaScript turned off. Do you check if a checkbox shows up when JavaScript is turned off? Apparently not.
Wow. Yeah, there's story after story, I think, of just all the different ways that companies and individuals are trying to tackle this kind of topic. And I guess that leads me a little bit to your book. I'd love to hear more about threats, what every engineer can learn from Star Wars, and maybe how that ties in a little bit with the topic of usability as well.
Start from explaining the book.
Yeah.
When I teach, let me start from a different part of the book. As an expert in security, I've been learning about these concepts of threats and different ways to organize and think about threats for decades, to the point where I have literally forgotten that I have learned some of these things. And so when I used to go and teach, people would ask me, where do I go to learn more about these threats? You're using these words as if we ought to know them. And so I realized, after I had written the threat modeling book, that there were these fundamental concepts which were implicit, and as security people, we know them, but as we go and we try to push security earlier in the process, we ask every engineer to get involved. They didn't know these concepts. And so the book is really focused on how do we teach normal engineers a little bit about security so that they can, and I want to be really careful here, intuitively, I want to say, how do we help them avoid dumb mistakes? But that's condescending and wrong. I don't want to say that. What I really want to say is, how can we help them avoid mistakes that are obvious if they know a little bit about security? And so teaching them a little bit about security becomes really important. And in the book, literally on the cover, and just going to turn around.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Wave a copy of the book here so that people can see it. I will try and do this without glare from the lights. Literally the cover has, it's a random building in Morocco that happened to have been in a movie once.
Oh, yeah.
We could talk for hours about the legal end of this and how do you do a book like this without annoying the fine folks at Lucas.
Yeah.
But from literally the cover inwards, I worked to make the book fun and accessible to people. And so, we start out with questions like, how does R2-D2 know who Obi-Wan Kenobi is when playing the hologram? And people laugh, right? It's a fun little question, and it allows us to get into the idea of authenticity and then violations of authenticity, which are spoofing.
Yeah.
And so we can work like that. And from a usability perspective, from a learning perspective, this is all about chunking. How do we give normal engineers the structures in which they can absorb this information? Because if we don't give them structures, it's just a fire hose of anecdote after anecdote or security issue after security issue. And so I can go on about this, but I'll pause there. I'll stop there.
No, I think that's so great. It's so important, like you said, to have security considerations be brought earlier into the engineering process. And I think this is such a great way to do that by making it accessible and enjoyable to read, because a lot of technical documentation isn't so enjoyable to read. So this is really great. And I look forward to reading it and having my team read it as well. So could you explain a little bit more about what threat modeling is to the general listener? I know many people listening will already know, but I think starting from there might be great.
I am assuming people have knowledge that they might not have is expensive because it leaves half a room behind.
Exactly.
So threat modeling is at its core using abstraction to help us think about security, right? And so we throw away some details to help us focus on the forest, not the trees. And the way we do this is we ask, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And I call that the 4-question framework for threat modeling. And your listeners might realize actually nothing security specific about these questions. They're just basic questions that we can ask about a project. And if you're asking those questions, you're threat modeling. And we can get a lot more specific. The book contains the threats book, the new one, contains ways to help you answer what can go wrong. The Designing for Security one is all about methodologies, processes, to help you answer all of those questions. But yeah, that's the basics of it.
So how exactly do you think usability factors into threat modeling? I know we talked about this a little bit already, but what are some ways that it can actually help mitigate potential threats?
Sure. So there are lots of threats where we want to ask a human being to take action. So an obvious example of this is authentication, right? We want a person to use an authenticator app or use the biometrics in their phone. And there are lots of times where we ask people to, for example, read, and I'm going to use some specific words here. We want to warn them about something. And we want them to incorporate that knowledge that we give them in the warning into the actions they then take. And so we might warn them with something like, some files can harm your computer. Be careful what you click on. Well, that's an entirely worthless warning. Which files can harm my computer? How do I make this decision about what to do? Or I have a job to do here. How much time am I supposed to spend thinking about each file I'm presented with and clicking on? Here's a case where if we don't think about usability, right, if we don't think about how does the human do the thing we want them to do, we're less secure, and the person is frustrated. Woohoo, it's a twofer.
Yeah. Yeah, what everybody wants in their job, for sure. Can you share some examples of security failures that occur due to poor usability?
I would say that some of the most common security failures are failures to intersect security and usability well. So classic phishing, for example, where you get a message, you usually email, not always, but you get a message, brings you to a website, and you're asked to authenticate. The website has all of the affordances that humans look for, and it looks like the website you expect to authenticate to, and so you enter some credentials, and they're reused by the attacker.
This podcast is brought to you by Quantal Security. It's important noting how tech innovations like the ones pioneered by Quantal are actively reshaping the security landscape. At Quantal, our mission is to build software innovations that make systems more accessible and more secure. From leveraging quantum technology to integrating anomaly detection and immutable ledger systems, we're solving security problems in the realms of access control and beyond. If you want to learn more about Quantal, visit our website at quantalsecurity.com and reach out to us. Probably one of the most common tactics for hacking in general, I would think. And so what are some future trends that you may think about when it comes to usability and security with evolving technologies, maybe AI? Do you have any thoughts on how those kinds of technologies will impact this field?
As people, we anthropomorphize. And in particular, large language models are really good have become in the last few months, really good at talking like humans. And they mostly do that today in text. But we have voice cloning, we have deep fakes. That stuff is getting better also very quickly.
Yeah.
And, you and I have never met. I have no reason to believe that you're an actual human being. Sorry.
Yeah, I just set up my AI deep fake. Yeah. You're talking to an AI right now.
Oh, cool. So well done. Well done. But in the future, how do we decide that the person we're talking to really is a human being, or even a human being who does not mean us harm? With the scaling that's possible because of these large language models, I'm really concerned that phishing will mutate from here's a link, please click it, to here's a convincing story, please engage with me, that the attacker leverages mirror neurons, belief, helpfulness, other properties, kindness. And so we already see this with a scam called business email compromise, where I'll email you and say, hey, I'm one of your employees, my paycheck hasn't come through, can you do this thing? Or, we might reverse it. I'm your boss. That would obviously fail since you run the company. I'm your boss. I need you to do this thing. And then we back and forth a little bit before you're asked to do the actual thing. And the the thing that slows this down is not the initial hooking. It's finding people who can back and forth with you to convince you to do that is hard to scale. And the new AIs will make that scale. So I'm quite worried about that part of our future.
So, yeah, I think about this a little bit too in the world of access control, where we have biometric data that gives entry to facilities or also just to computers and other devices. And with technology like AI, I wonder where that is going to head in terms of authentication. Do you have any thoughts on how you could threat model for those types of threats?
Sure. So the essential way that I would threat model biometrics in general is to ask, what are we working on? And what we're working on would be an authentication system. So what does that system look like? There's some sensor, there's some database of information about humans. And we can ask, what does, and I'm going to use a little bit of biometrics jargon, what does enrollment look like? What does verification look like? And for example, if the enrollment is done in controlled circumstances, for example, you're going to sign up for global entry, passport control sorts of things. You go to a facility, someone looks at your ID, they compare it to a bunch of things, and then they take whatever it is, your fingerprints, and put them in a database. And then when you go and you try to use this, it's again in a controlled situation where the fingerprint scanner is under the control of customs. And so there's one set of threats. We could also think about a biometric system where the scanner is under the control of the person, right? It's on the other side of a trust boundary where, you could replace your fingerprint scanner easily with a set of computers running in AWS, and all of them say, oh yes, I'm a fingerprint scanner, Adam. Here's Erica's fingerprint, and you do it 2 million times a second until you find a fingerprint that works.
Yeah.
And so the situation, what are we working on, informs what can go wrong. And so that's how I would start to threat model that.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. It's great to hear this kind of methodology in terms of how you would approach figuring out how a system could be hacked or compromised. And it's something that I think should be done more and more in access control and beyond. Industries where access control is one industry where things tend to lag behind by decades in terms of security. So one other question I have in maybe kind of playing into the access control world is, but really in any security industry, is that we have large amounts of data now in access controls in ledger systems and having people's personal information mixed in with access control. And in other industries, even with biometrics, you have people's personal data related to their biometrics in some of these systems. Have you seen any areas where these can be compromised easily and where you think people should be more careful? Or do you think that these industries are staying on top of these issues?
This is challenging. And the thing that makes it most challenging is that most of us, most of the time, have very little opportunity to argue against these systems.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone yesterday who said, I finally enrolled in global entry because after a 13-hour flight to the US, there was a 2-hour pen waiting to get through customs.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, if you're going for, that company that imposed that silly check on, am I a bot? My choice is use them or don't use them. And when I signed up for them, they didn't have this thing, right? I wouldn't have even gotten through sign up if it was present at the time. And so I think that most security is as good as it needs to be to protect the organization. And CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, just released a document titled Shifting the Balance, Secure by Design and Default. And there's a lot of things happening at the level of, we need laws and regulation to protect normal people, because if I'm a company, it is easy for me to say, oh, I'm going to put this biometric thing in place and people will just need to comply with it. And well, I could invest in protecting the data. And you're getting the very cynical Adam this morning. Why? Right? I could make more money by not protecting it super well. And I think that's an unfortunate choice.
Yeah.
But absent something like PCI, where payment cards are protected, you're gonna get a lot of low bars, and it's really hard for individuals to force the issue, right? The power dynamic is not in our favor as individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting that in a lot of cases, security and organizations don't really care that much about security. They want to put the bare minimum in place in order to sell more product and do it at the lowest cost possible. So that's one of the reasons I started this podcast, actually, is to bring more awareness to how we can have better usability, better security, and implement that in these industries that are lagging behind. So I appreciate your perspective on this.
Awesome. And I just want to say, I want to add to that, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
I like what you're doing, and I think it's really, even when there is regulation in place, making it easier to get going, making it easier to do a reasonable job, it helps everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of these lightweight methods, right? How do we make it easy so that there's time to do the complex work rather than getting bogged down in, oh my gosh, we've got to do this 25-step process in order to get going.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're doing this. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And, it is interesting to also raise the flag that there are lots of cases where systems have become more convenient, more usable at the sacrifice of security because they haven't gone about it in the proper ways and used the proper methodologies, which is why I think threat modeling is so important. And I'm so glad you could join. Do you have any interesting stories of where that was true in your studies?
So let me actually go to what you were just saying about security versus convenience. But let's talk about the evolution of phones for just a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Right? When Apple introduced the iPhone and we started putting our lives in our phones, they had this passcode feature. You can enter a PIN to unlock your phone. And they've said publicly, like 10% of people had PINs on their phones. When they started introducing fingerprint scanners and now Face ID, and some other features to really push you hard to lock your phone, the rates are now up at like 90+% of people have their phones locked. And it's pretty convenient. And again, to the threat model, all your personal data is stored on the phone.
Right.
it's interesting that Apple had telemetry to know what percentage of people have their phones locked.
Yeah.
Um, we could ask some privacy questions there, but I think they made a sensible choice to know the number so that they could actually make the case for these things.
Yeah, that's a great
example. This is an example of a place. Thank you. This is an example of a place where security has been improved by usability, right? Instead of punching in a 4-6-digit code, I glance at my phone and I hold my attention on it for a second, and it does what I want it to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a super positive example that we should all think about emulating.
Yeah. I completely agree. And so when it comes to convenience and security, I think we can all agree that there are instances where it has gone terribly wrong, but I think those instances have put a bad taste in the mouth of some like pessimistic people who think that they're exclusive. And I think the lesson from talking with you and to all of our listeners is that you can put things in place that increase quality of life usability for the end customer while also enhancing the security quite a bit. And I appreciate you taking the time, Adam. Do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share? Maybe related to your book or any other thing?
I just want to emphasize what you said right there. It's so good. If you frame this as we must always make trade-offs, you'll always get trade-offs. And if you think about and instead of or, and you think about it early in the design cycle, so you can say, what are we going to do to deliver usability and security? You can expand what's possible. And so I just wanted to emphasize your point there. It's a great close. Thank you.
Yeah. It was a great close, but I just had another thought that I'd like to ask you. Maybe I'll move it around in the podcast. Who knows? But so, what would be your number one piece of advice, drawing back to your book, for engineers who maybe know very little about security, to just ingrain it into their way of thinking when building products early on?
I mean, the easy answer is the book.
Yeah, right? I was about to say that. Read the book.
Yeah, so yes, read the book. But more, security doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be secret knowledge. And there's this thing which happens, and I see this all the time when I'm delivering training. People will say to me, okay, I did this, I did that, but what about the threat that I've missed? Okay, that's a good question. People really feel that. And my answer is, it's always possible that you will miss something. But if you don't do any threat modeling, it is certain that you will miss many things.
Yeah.
And so, do you achieve perfection? No. But do you make it better by putting some work in? And I think this is a core of the agile way we now work in most organizations, is do something, check it, do more. Over time, we improve things. And I think that people are taught to focus in on, the Ocean's 11, the super hack, and all that. But the reason that the Ocean's 11 folks need to do all of that complicated stuff is because you can't just walk into the casino, grab some chips off the table, and run out safely. They've dealt with the basics. And if you don't deal with the basics, people are not going to do the crazy, impossible stuff. They'll just walk in, grab the cash from your cash register, and leave. And so the question of what do I want people to know is that getting started is really helpful. And don't worry about the crazy, impossible bits.
Yeah, that's I really love that you said that, because I do see with engineers sometimes who don't have any cybersecurity background, they feel this like, uh-oh, no, I don't want to touch that because I'm not qualified. I don't want like liability, whatever it might be. But if you can handle the basics and do something, it's better than nothing, just like what you said. So I really love that way of thinking. And I think it's so important as a standard, really, for any engineer building software product. Adam, thanks so much. I appreciate you coming and joining on the show. And everybody go read his book, including me. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm going to be buying a copy for everyone on my team as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Take care. If you like this episode, you can follow us for more on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.